Something Wicked and with the whole Idol Reputation series, what really sort of inspired it was, or the political aspects of it, I should say, is I wanted to look at what happens after the revolution. I feel like there are so many amazing examples of stories where we see these characters leading the revolution and succeeding and going through that. But I wanted to look at the aftermath. Like, how do you rebuild? How do you restructure? How do you say, okay, we overthrew the monarchy, we're going to set up a democracy? How does that actually happen? Like, what are the steps to go about that? So that was kind of the basis of like the political climate. The world itself is obviously influenced by Moulin Rouge, which again, Broadway always. And the story itself is a very loose retelling of Macbeth. So Avon itself is really sort of this amalgamation of all of the different Shakespeare tragedy settings. In this one, we are in Skoda, which is very heavily influenced by Scotland, where Macbeth takes place. And we'll kind of visit each of these different provinces that are all, very loosely drawn from a Shakespeare setting to sort of create the atmosphere of that individual province. Lady Kate is a courtesan. She is also gifted. So in Avon, those who are gifted, they are all women and they all have some sort of magical ability. And pretty much everybody has a different ability. You don't really see a lot of repeats. And Kate's ability is that she can influence people's emotions when they have an orgasm in her presence. So obviously, being a courtesan works really well for her. That has sort of become her a natural path to follow. But she's actually been living at La Puissance, which is a pleasure club, for many, many years, because she and her twin sister, who is also gifted, were, kicked out of their home. Uh, Being gifted is really like heavily, I don't want to say punished because they are sort of like able to live their lives, but it's very restricted. So there's all these rules about, what you can and can't do. You have to, have a very limited number of them are allowed in one place at one time. They are not allowed to just like go out and get a job. They're not allowed to have children. So there's lots of restrictions, and sort of freeing the gifted from the restrictions is one of the main tenets of the revolution, was getting rid of those, letting them be able to live their lives freely. But we're still in that aftermath where, we're kind of in this gray area where, yes, these restrictions have been overturned, but we're still sort of like figuring out the new government. And, so there still is a lot of uncertainty with how they're going to be treated. And Kate is very much set on protecting herself, protecting her sister, keeping the girls that live with them at the club safe. And she's not fully interested in everything else that's happening around outside of her. But she meets Callum, who is the son of the former king of Skoda. So, he's spent his whole life training to take over and be king himself one day. And then with this revolution, that has all been taken away from him. And he is, very interested in continuing to be a leader, but with the way that the uprising has set up this new foundation of democracy, if he wants to be considered for a position as leader, he has to kill his father, who is still technically the current king. So he is suffering lots of angst. And with Lady Catarine's ability to manipulate emotions, she is somebody that he is sort of forced to turn to in that moment to help him out. And they are very different and have very different philosophies. And I think different life goals in a lot of ways, but they come together, and there's lots of spicy time together. And in that, and through their time together, they're really kind of able, I think, to open each other up to new and different perspectives in a lot of ways. It was super fun because that's just like one of the ways that you can like let yourself kind of play a little bit. And it was really fun to do a lot of the research too, and just looking at, because obviously this is not set in any sort of like real time period, but Moulin Rouge itself is set in 1899. So I did sort of use that as like a grounding point in terms of a lot of the historical stuff. Um, so yeah, just like, I got to spend the day on Pinterest and scroll through all these different examples of like outfits and what they would have worn. And that was really cool to lend myself to that and just kind of call it work as I was going through it, doing all of that research. And then, I think what is like kind of fun about romantasy, or any fantasy really is, you can have this grounding point of, I'm going to base it off of this time period, but really you get to make the rules. And, so if I found something that I didn't like, I could just change it or get rid of it. And that was really fun because obviously I have mostly written contemporary up until this point. And so, with that, you do have to make it at least semi realistic. And, you have people that are going to know if I set a book in New York City and I get something totally wrong, well, then everybody who lives in New York City is going to know and is going to, not be happy about that. So it was fun to have some freedom and just get to play around and make my own rules for a little bit. That was very cool. I love all the girls really. I love Callum's sister Dom was so fun to write. I love like a sassy little sister who is just, gonna give the older brother hell. That is always a fun character to write. I'm the oldest sister, so it's kind of fun to write the younger siblings sometimes because I feel like they have a little bit more freedom and they get to kind of do and say what they want. But I loved all of the girls that live at La Puissance, and you'll see a lot of them as well again in coming books. So that was cool too to kind of lay a foundation for them and then get to explore them a little bit more in these later books. So the second book is called What Light Breaks. We don't have an exact release date yet, but it will be at some point in 2026, probably later in the year, obviously. And this one is a very loose Romeo and Juliet retelling. So we are having a brand new couple. So we will still see Kate and Callum, but their sort of love story is kind of resolved at this point. So we'll see them in terms of the political landscape. So I will say, I'm not allowed to say too much, but I will say you do meet the hero of book two in Something Wicked for a very brief moment. And I think if you have read Something Wicked and you've gotten to that last page, you'll probably know who the female main character is. And so we get to see their love story. This one is a marriage of convenience. So that's something I haven't written before. So that was a fun trope to get to play with.